Um, you guys know that I have sort of a chip on my shoulder about coming from a third world nation and living in your beautiful first world nation. I think you've noticed that I like to remind my students in Santa Barbara that the rest of the world is a very different place. And so I wanted to focus today on the differences and on the process of going from there to here, and I want to talk about what's called development, which is when you build a modern economy. And I want to talk about the demographic transition, which some of you have heard about from Human Geography or the video the other day or other sources, which is the way that your society changes when you go from being a poor nation to being a wealthy nation. Our warm-up will come up today in that conversation. And I guess we should start with that homework assignment that you just got stamped. So let's start with your vocab on 6.2 just to make sure you don't need help. Although, I got to tell you that every one of these words is pretty much just their straight-up English interpretation. So you probably wrote down 10,000 definitions that for people with a decent vocabulary are just obvious. There's no like weird trick definitions here. So can I help you with any of these? Were you confused about any of them? A word that you didn't find or that you didn't know?
Or just last night.
Just last night? Disease terminology? No? Moving on? Okay, great. In number 40, it's not rocket science once you get the pattern. This whole birth rate, death rate, immigration, emigration, a lot of my kids are like, wait, I have to multiply a fraction by 1 in 1,000 by 1%, and it's negative and it's positive and it's freaking me out. It's actually easy if you just know what you're talking about. So birth is people being added, right? Because if one of you has a baby, we got an extra person in the room. So that's a positive. If one of you dies, we got to throw you outside to ease the odor. So that's a negative number because you're leaving the population. Immigrants are people that are coming in, and emigration is the process of leaving. So those are positives and negatives. And literally, like with any other positive and negative, you just add the positives, subtract the negatives, and that's your growth. Anybody know what negative growth means? Shrinkage. Population decline. So in the United States, if it were not for our immigration, we would actually have a negative number. In the U.S., we have like the numbers are not the same, but we would be negative 0.1 something. Negative 0.17, 0.13. I don't even know where we are these days. I haven't figured out that number in a long time. But in the absence of immigration, our country would be just barely shrinking. So we are very careful about keeping our population growing just a little bit so we can get more workers in the economy to make more stuff and buy more stuff and pay more taxes to keep our economy growing. We have to take other countries' people to make sure that our country stays in the growth, because that's kind of one of the only ways we can grow our economy anymore. Okay. And we talked about the rule of 70 already. Remember that if you want to figure out what this is going to do to your population, you're going to double in 35 years. Because 70 divided by the growth rate as a percentage, just a straight up 2, will give you your doubling time. So if that's an annual percent, then that's in years. Yeah.
For population change, do you want to know the percentage? Because it says like population plus that. Do you divide it by the original population, or?
Okay, so this is a really good question. I want everybody to understand her question. She said, do I want this as a percentage, and then you divide it by the original? There is no single standard. You should know that one way to look at this is by raw numbers. And so you could just say that like this many were born, this many died, and so that gives you a balance of whatever that is, right? And that would be a positive number because the big one is. You could also, if you know your initial population, you could divide this by your initial, and that would give you what the percentage equals. A lot of times, these are just factored in people per 1,000, which is just the point percentage. There's, as long as you stay consistent, if your starting numbers are in percentage, your answer will remain in percentage. If your numbers that you're given are in individuals, then your answer will be in individuals. If you needed to calculate the percentage, you would need to know the initial number of individuals too. There's no special trick. There's no like manipulation of numbers. There's no hidden math here. Yeah.
But so if you were going to do rule of 70 after, would you have to find the percentage of
Yes.
the individual?
The rule of 70 only works with the growth rate as a percentage.
So that's when you would do the individual divided by the initial.
If you were given individuals and an initial population, yes. Everybody hear that one? The rule of 70 only works with the percentage growth rate. So her question was, what if they give you individuals, how do you do the rule of 70? Well, you got to know the initial population so you can get the percentage, because the rule of 70 only works with growth rate as a percentage. Yes? Easy make reason the both? Any more numerical trickery? Voodoo mathematics? No. 41 we're going to do tomorrow because we have a whole day to talk about age structures. 42 I thought was kind of trivia-ish. Unless there's a question. So I want to talk about this now, which is building your economy. Development is building an economy. You develop an economy. There's a lot of people who work in economic development. It's a job title. It is a government function. So governments develop the economy. There's like a department in Sacramento called the Department of Economic Development. Santa Barbara City probably has some desk focus on economic development. But I want to look at this at the national level. And question number 43 begins to build this. Here's how I want to start. this guy named something Brandt, B-R-A-N-D-T. I don't know his first name. You could Google that. Brandt wanted to map the countries that had the highest and the lowest population growth. So I don't remember the year. I think I should just look this up, and I'll get you his name, and I'll get you the year. But here it comes. His name was Willy Brandt. And he made a report in the year 1980. And basically he wanted to distinguish, first of all, which were the countries with like a high birth rate and a high death rate. And technically, he was talking about what's called the North-South divide. So you might realize that this map could be seen as a whole lot of things. So the First and Second World, the amount of money per capita, so people above average and people below average on money. You could look at this as the developed or less developed, but I'm starting with this guy named Willy Brandt, who based this primarily on the countries that had high birth rates and low birth rates. Anybody know what else this map could show you? Yeah. Development, yeah, what else? Stable economies. What else? Anybody want to make any other obvious observations? Like, what does a lot of the blue countries have in common, considering that you're looking at Australia and South Africa?
Democracy?
Yeah, white people, maybe. Yeah, money, development. You could say that the imperialist nations. Yeah, you could say the longevity of their governmental systems. Yeah, that's actually also mapped in blue.
Mostly democratic nation.
I'm not sure, because in 1980, one of those big blue ones was not so democratic.
Well, now they are, right?
And now they are, but this was 1980.
Oh, this is
Depends who you ask, because they're bluish. They're going to like purple, right?
Low birth rate?
Because it's like a democratic communist country.
But wouldn't they have like a stable economy?
Oh yeah.
Their demographics stable.
Yeah. But in 1980, they were already in the blue.
a lot of these places besides like parts of Asia are warm. I don't know if that means anything.
Me either.
Australia's pretty
Long military, including Australia.
Yeah, doing militaries. Yeah. All right. So you could say there's a technological divide mapped here. You could talk about countries where there are people going in and going out. So people generally go into the blue countries and people generally go out of the red countries. You could say it's the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere with a couple of exceptions. You know, if you were just looking at the bottom of the globe, it would look pretty darn red. And if you're looking at the top of the globe, it looks pretty darn blue. You could explain this with a history of imperialism. You could say that the countries that take resources are blue, and the countries that lose their resources are red. Brandt made this thing called the Brandt Report to say, look, we have a pretty divided planet, and in order to map this, his primary thing was birth rates. And can anybody tell me why poverty, which is red, has such a strong correlation to high birth rates, which is also red? I mean, I got 5 reasons, so I'm going to see if anybody can find them. Yeah.
More children equals more work.
Yeah, that's number 5 on the list. That's called the labor effect. So we got number 5, the labor effect. Why does poverty equal population growth?
Well, because sometimes when in poverty there's a famine, and with famine you lose children, so it ensures your right of
Yeah, number 4 is high death rates necessitate high birth rates, which might be sort of what you were saying, that there's either a real or a perceived need to make a lot because they're not going to make it.
Lack of education.
Well, what do we mean by education? Because anybody knows how to make babies. I mean, he's got to watch a couple like chickens out on the farm or a couple of dogs in the front yard, or
Birth control. Education.
everybody knows, right? You pee in her belly button and she gets pregnant.
Yeah.
What?
Like sex ed education or birth control education.
Yeah, now we're getting a little bit closer. So sex ed, you know, doesn't take a lot of ed for sex.
Money for birth control.
But yeah, birth control, now we're getting somewhere. And there's a couple of specific details, you know. Number 2 is limited access to medical care and birth control.
Rights of women.
Women rights is number 1, so we're only left with number 3, unfortunately. Number 3 is, so number 1 is female disenfranchisement. That's the whopper. You know, when women aren't making decisions and they don't have potential to be independent, they just got to, like, shut up and lay down for a few minutes. Yeah, no, I know that just kind of rolls off the tongue, but it's not like I'm down with this. I just mean to say, seriously, think about it. Hold on. I use inflammatory language because I got to make sure you stay awake. This is an important topic for me. Keep in mind that a lot of you, to put it crudely, don't have to put out. Like, you're fine. You are educated. You have some measure of economic and political potential. In this country, you know, women are pretty darn close to equal. I mean, thank God that took a lot of work. You know, you stand on the shoulders of giants, but thank God that this is sort of the place where you live. Here, if you don't want to make babies right now, you can pretty much put your foot down, and if things get out of control, you can call the police, and they're on your side. You can call me, and I'm on your side. Ally. But there's a lot of other countries where this would not be true. I mean, girls, there's a lot of other countries where you wouldn't be sitting here. It would just be guys. You know, in many countries, a woman's education is like how to fix my shirt, how to cook my dinner, and how to stay out of the public eye. In a lot of countries, women aren't allowed to carry money. Like, how are you going to buy your food and pay your rent? You're not, unless your husband does that for you. So if he says shut up and lay down for 3 minutes, you kind of have to. And I know that that's sort of, you know, uncomfortable and awkward, and I use that inflammatory language on purpose because it sounds so outlandish to us, thank God. So number 1 was the female disenfranchisement. Number 2 is the limited access to basic medicine and birth control. And, you know, it often takes a little tiny bit of education to understand how to control your fertility without birth control. You know, you can get within about 90% birth control just by avoiding your single most fertile week. It's not perfect. Ladies, you can do better than 90% nowadays because this is America. But, you know, that basic, you know, the rhythm method, the fertility timing thing, like that's, you know, that would help a lot. Number 3 that nobody called out was demonstrated by the fact that girls, you don't have your 2 children in tow and you're not pregnant with your 3rd. In poor nations, women have a very early age of first childbearing. That's the easiest one to change, by the way. Of all the 5 I mentioned, the easiest one to change geopolitically is number 3. age of first childbearing. Even in the United States, the age of first childbearing is very strongly correlated to money. Girls, if you are rich, chances are you'll have your first child later than the other girls in the same room that are poor. Because of, like you might have the opportunity or the potential or the whim to pursue other alternatives because you can afford it. A lot of women, it's like when they leave high school, they can't afford college, or they owe someone money, or they got to pitch in for the rent, and college is not an option. So poverty everywhere in the world means you pretty much like less options. And so, well, okay, I guess pregnancy, maybe families, time to start my family now. Number 4 is the high death rates, which necessitate the high birth rates, and number 5 is the labor effect. There's 5 basic reasons why red equals high birth rates. So how do we measure development? Like, how do you know you're in the third world? I'm in the third world, and I can tell because I see...
Trash.
What? Yeah, I guess maybe a lot of children. Might just be in the Mormon part of the world. What, you see what? String, right. Bing, bing.
Lots of pollution.
Poverty.
Poverty.
Factories.
No, factories is not 4. What's that?
No education.
Huts.
Limited education,
Slums.
primitive housing. Not necessarily, no. Some of the most crowded places like Singapore are pretty wealthy.
New old people.
Yeah, high mortality, high morbidity.
Civil War.
Yeah, political instability. Check it out. There's a lot of ways to measure development. Yeah.
Does women reproducing at an earlier age, does that mean since they would reproduce for longer, I guess, is that a factor?
Yeah, because no matter what, you reach an age where your body cannot bear children. In the absence of birth control and access to medicine, you've got a finite reproductive life, and you're most fertile right about now. The reason all the predators look for ladies your age is because men are built for that, because women are built for this. Like at this age, evolutionarily speaking, you are at like peak reproductive potential, or even a couple years ago. If we could just keep you in school, give you potential to get into a job and keep you in school a little longer and wait for you to stabilize your career and then you start breeding, all you got left is a couple of years. Remember that the woman in Japan that worked for the television station, she was the first female newscaster. Because she pursued a career before having kids, she could only have like 3, max. But she was just cranking them out because she's got a sunset date. You were born with all your eggs, ladies. You heard this, right? Your ovaries are born full. And they'll start dropping them when they start dropping them. There's only so many left in the can. So when you're starting to run out, you're out. I mean, absent of freaky medicine stuff, you're still out. If you add all those together, you get what's called the Human Development Index, which is actually a pretty complicated equation these days. I don't know. And if you put this on a scale of 1 to 10, all countries get a rating if they give data. You'll notice there's a couple countries in the gray. They're in the gray because they did not provide data. Human Development Index. And let me show you something funny. This is the map of how the United Nations rates your country's development. You'll notice that the United States is a 10. We're the dark green. So us, Canada, the UK,
Australia.
the Scandinavian countries, Australia, Japan. I think France might even be a 9, sadly. Germany, I think, is supposed to be a 10. Italy's like an 8.
Oh, there's a tiny little country thing on South America.
Yeah, is that French
Trinidad?
Guiana, maybe? Trinidad, something. Who cares? Look, you already know the big ones, because, you know, they're the ones that are always making all the decisions and pointing all the guns and stuff. But what's this? I'll show you the map of who's got money. You'll notice some of those red countries stay red, right? It's like, oh, we ain't got no money. Oh, we ain't got no development neither.
Oh, really fast.
Gotta go. Anybody gonna bark? Now you might notice a couple of weird exceptions, though. Like, what's this one? I got an interesting one to show you. Look at this. Anybody know what kind of country that is? What country is that? Africa's a continent. Thank you. What country?
Zambia?
I don't have to know because I'm in America. Nope.
Asia.
Okay, here we go.
South Carolina.
Here we go. Here we go. Excuse me. You can stop guessing. It's getting pretty sad. Angola has a pretty reasonable amount of money. On the money scale, they're like an 8. But watch this. On the development scale, they're like a 2. How can you be a wealthy country where life sucks for almost everyone? Inequitable distribution of wealth. So this is what the Occupy Wall Street people are freaking out about, but they could do even worse than Wall Street. So inequitable distribution of wealth. Some places they have a really, really, really severe inequity there. For the most part, though, if you got money, you're fine. And if you're a well-developed nation, you know, you're probably a pretty rich nation. Probably, for the most part, ish. Few exceptions, you know, a little history of warfare will cost you some development.
Saudi Arabia is really
If you're a really strange country, you could call yourself pretty well developed even if you're kind of broke. And there are a couple of broke-ish countries that are slightly more developed because everybody's broke together, but they've been that way for a long time, so it kind of works out for the fundamentals. So now, I want to do the final part of our class today. I want to bridge that gap from the third world to the first world. You should know, first of all, that Steady Goal 45 gets 3 stars. By the way, is this somebody's sweater? Oh, somebody took it. Whose was it? Yeah, the one right here. Oh, dang, I was going to give it my wife. I was hoping nobody would claim it. Okay.
Is that how you get it all over Christmas presents?
On video. Okay. So there's a lot of details here. I gotta warn you, this is like some frantic note taking, and tomorrow I'm gonna add 2 layers to this, so it gets kind of dense, and don't say I didn't warn you. You've probably heard this most as the first world, second world, third world, which is an economic distinction now that's based probably on a Cold War societal north-south, east-west divide. So historically, the first world, second, and you didn't even know this, first world, second world, third world was probably born with like the good guys, the commies, and the rest. Back in like the early Cold War days, I think. And then it came to mean something about economics. So who's got the money, first world, who's getting the money, second world, and who ain't got no money, the third world. So today, here comes the part you do need to. In economics terms, we have three options. Economics. So an economist would tell you, you're either developed in the first world, you're developing, and that's the second world, or you're pre-developed, less developed, or undeveloped, and that's the third world. So for economics, you go stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. That's just for economics. I got to give you guys a little tiny bit of advice. If you're talking to a Nigerian businesswoman or an Ecuadorian businessman, and you say, oh, you're from one of those undeveloped nations or least developed nations, get ready. Most people don't like that term. It has a lot of racial and imperial undertones. And even if you don't mean it that way, you should know that these terms, please look up, these terms, they got a lot of cultural baggage. We don't throw that around lightly, and you got to be really careful about which audience you use these in, because there is a context where we use them, but this is language that is considered kind of inflammatory. I try never to use those words. Okay.
What would be a more sensitive term?
Yeah, we just don't talk about them. We pretend they're not there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like your crazy uncle. I don't know what you're talking about. I think probably we would say least developed nation, or least developed nations. But I just don't know a better way to say it. That's just a not nice way to say it. For sure. You know, some of the least developed nations have like some of the oldest cultural histories, for example. So they can go like, bro, I got documents that go back 10,000 years. Like, you've been in your country for 230. Like, it's touchy and go. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. But then that implies primitive. It's like, oh, you primitives.
What's wrong with developing?
Well, that technically, that sounds a lot more like, way to go, you're getting Tiger. But, like, that is a distinction that we have to make because there are countries that are not developing.
What do they call them, the BRICS countries now?
Oh, this is a brick right here.
That's what we're still talking about.
Yeah, I'm still talking about these. The good news is there's very few of these left today. Globally, we say that the third world is gone now. There is no more third world.
Is the third world mainly just a couple countries in Africa?
Actually, today, the third world might mean Chad, which is in Africa. It might be one half of Sudan. I can't remember. Now that Sudan has split, the south has the oil, I think, and so maybe it's North Sudan, maybe. Like Bangladesh, but they've had a lot of foreign investment, and the globalization thing is kind of bringing them some measure of development. I don't know. What about South America? Nobody really likes to say it down there. No, I mean, Argentina would tell you that they're first world. Most of the world would tell you Argentina's at least second world. I don't really think anybody likes to admit they're in the third world, and I don't know that we have anybody left in the third world. Okay. Whatever. Look, you should know that in economics, it's a three-phase thing. Not developed, developing, or developed. But that's only in economics. in global development, socio-political conversation, almost everybody makes it a 4-phase process where you split the development into early and late. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Here they go. We already talked about this. You know, not a lot of money per person. That's green for money. High death rates. That's red. And you understand why high death rates. There's a lot of preventable disease, a lot of hunger, a lot of instability, shortage of water. And there's very high birth rates, and we just listed the 5 reasons. Disenfranchisement, limited medicine / birth control, early age of first childbearing, the necessity or the perceived necessity to have high birth rates, and the labor effect, right? Yeah, you already wrote that down. You're number 1. Okay. So you all know about this. This is what we call the third world, or stage 1, least developed nations. And globally, there's very, very few. Now, you'll notice that in stage 2, death rates are going to come down. We're going to keep people from dying. We call that early development. When you first throw some money into that country, people stop dying. And you should note that part basically is easy. Nobody wants to die. Like, it doesn't have to be good food. It doesn't have to be bottled Evian. I mean, you go in a refugee camp, and you like throw some chicken scratch out of the helicopter and like spray people with a hose, and death rates go down. I don't mean to be inflammatory, but you understand that keeping people alive in a truly impoverished nation is not that challenging. It's a little bit of food, a little bit of water, some anti-malarial medications or some antidiuretics. And death rates go down. That's easy. We call that early development. That's just the first little bit of money. Doesn't take a lot of money. The first little bit of money, food, water, sanitation, and medicine, and death rates come down, and you finish stage 2, and you enter stage 3. Now, stage 3, that's tricky. Stage 3, this is the difficult part. This is the crux. We have a ton of countries that are here right now around the globe. But I gotta tell you, the bad news is they might not get past this. Later development is a lot trickier because to lower birth rates, you would have to change people's culture. Do you all realize that you're almost guaranteed to have the same number of children as your parents did? Well, because you almost certainly share their religious views. And even if you don't right now as a teenager, I got to tell you, this is just sort of like a blip in your life. You'll be much more like your mom than you think you will. Sorry to tell you, dude, it sucks. I know. No. I know. I'm 30. You're telling me. Like, I look in the mirror every day and I realize, dang, I'm more and more like my father. And, in many ways, that's good. You'll come to appreciate your mother more, and you'll understand her better when you go through some of her struggles, and maybe you'll identify more with her, and you'll be happy with that. But we basically become more like our parents than we wanted to. We probably share the same religions, and even if you don't right now, you might when you're at the reproductive age, or whatever. I don't know. Yeah, I can't look at her anymore. So, no, you know what I mean. So whenever you're like at the point where you start thinking about having a family, you'll probably make a lot of the same decisions that your parents made because they influence you a lot, and you grew up in very much the same world. And the same thing that her grandparents told her, your grandparents are probably going to tell you, and we end up, on average, about 95% of humans have the same number of children as their parents have. Yeah.
Unless they had a bad experience with their own family and then choose something different.
You know what's creepy, dude? Like, I mean, we can change, but we change a lot less than you think. When push comes to shove and you get to that actual point of making that decision and you're the same age that they were, you end up making a lot of the same decisions. And so consciously you could change, like you could decide, I hate what happened in my household and that'll never happen in my house, and hopefully you pull that off. But, sometimes your culture will change. So like, Mom, you grew up in a different time, and around here, like, I can go to college, so I'm not going to start having kids at 17, and right on. But globally, as an average, most of us have roughly the same number of children.
What about how does marriage tie into it? Somebody marries someone who has
So, if legal things change or cultural things change, then your number of children will change. But generally, it's difficult to lower hurdles. I guess we'll have to come back here tomorrow. I'm sorry we got so distracted. We didn't quite get to finish today.